All right, we are live for another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. I feel funny doing an intro with my guest, Loz Nash, on, as she did such a good intro on our last podcast. But the ex-fit dietitian, welcome back onto the potty.
Thanks, Geordie. Yeah, I feel like my intro was way better than yours, so I think you need to start scripting it, eh?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've just done it so many times. It's like not a nervous tick, but like a mental thing. It's like you have to, as soon as you hear the start, say these things and then you're good to go. And if anything throws that off, it really mentally throws me off the whole start of the podcast.
Yeah, true. You got to stick to what you know sometimes, I think, hey?
That's true. That's true. And sticking to what you know is a great segue into this topic that we're talking about, because this is an area of your expertise, not so much mine. You work with a lot of strength athletes and you yourself are a bit of a superstar when it comes to CrossFit. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking all things CrossFit nutrition do's and don'ts.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, like you said, I mean, yes, I'm like, CrossFit is my space, but I think it would be good to, have a chat about it because as well, get your input from someone that's not inside the CrossFit space. So I think, the reason why we decided we were going to have a chat about this is because CrossFit's nutrition recommendation is so stupid. Like, we've had chats about this in terms of kind of what is it actually promoting? And for anyone that's listening who, maybe doesn't know what CrossFit's nutrition recommendation is, I'll quote it from the website. So this is what CrossFit recommends as their nutrition kind of recommendation. So it's eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, and no sugar. Keep intake to levels that will support exercise, but not body fat. Like, I don't know about you, Geordie, but I feel like that's such an ambiguous kind of random statement that could probably be interpreted 100 different ways depending on who read that statement.
Yeah, what's the go with these recommendations that they bring out? Because I've heard a lot of people talk about this. And again, I think it's interesting looking at it from an outsider perspective. The same is that I like having conversations with other dietitians about combat sports, because obviously you need a lot of theory behind it, but you don't really quite understand how all that theory works until you get knee deep in it and you're in the trenches and you do the training. You're like, okay, now I appreciate why carbs are so important for this, because I feel FUCK'd all training session. But like, I don't understand where these recommendations come from. Are these like written from whoever runs like the CrossFit organization, or are these from like outside people, or what's the go with this?
So that's stated on the CrossFit website. I think it has been adapted over the years. It used to be kind of very explicitly stated that keto was the way for CrossFit. And I think they have kind of trying to sway back from that recommendation. But yeah, even the amount of info they provide on the website is also very vague. So it does make you wonder, like, who on earth came up with this statement and why? Like, if you think about it, it's quite a paleo approach. So, like the whole foods, which is great. It's always great to have your meats and your vegetables and your nuts and your seeds. That's a really great way to live, great way to eat. But for athletes, as anyone that probably follows sports dietitians would know, we're always promoting things in packets, muesli bars, like, jam on toast, all those types of things. But they don't really seem to fit into this like CrossFit recommendation. So I don't know, maybe we could just kind of break that statement down, because yeah, I mean, doing CrossFit myself, or doing any sport, to be honest, I feel like that's a great kind of healthy eating recommendation. But I think for a sport that entails so much energy expenditure, it's probably not the greatest statement. And, maybe we could write a letter to CrossFit, Geordie, and get them to kind of reconsider that statement.
Definitely could. I think like looking at it, and I think if I put my marketing hat on, I kind of get it, right? Like eat meat and veg, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, and no sugar. Even that statement there, it's very much like you're appealing to people who, and I don't want to sound offensive with this, but probably don't have a super detailed knowledge of nutrition as it is, right? Because like that sounds healthy. Like if you're just looking at that from a peripheral view, eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, and no sugar, seems pretty healthy, right? But I think the conversation that you need to start having is, okay, well, health is one thing, performance is another. And like, as performance dietitians and professionals, what you want to do is kind of get the best of both worlds. And it's like, well, are you really going to get all that performance benefit if you're just eating, say, like a paleo or keto diet while you're doing a sport, like we'll talk about, that's predominantly glycolytic?
Yeah, no, for sure. And, like I love seeing, I think I've done a post, like some people have done posts before, and it's kind of like you can have those two mindsets. Like you said, you've got general nutrition and you've got sports nutrition. And people think, oh my God, to be an athlete or to be sports nutrition, like that's healthy. Like that's fruit, veggies, blah, blah, blah. Like, yes, that's the basis of it, like of an athlete's diet. But all those little bits and pieces, that you have before training, during training, they're things like muesli bars, like lollies, like dates, jam, like all those things that sometimes get perceived as unhealthy. But when we break it down, like the purpose of sports nutrition is to provide us with that really fast digesting energy that's going to fuel our workouts. And I think this type of a statement, it doesn't take those things into consideration. It's looking at like that whole diet, but an athlete's diet typically is going to have, those higher carb, high sugar foods in it because, like you said, CrossFit's glycolytic. That's our body's main fuel source for high intensity exercises.
Just on that, we'll break down what paleo and keto is. I think that's important to talk about right from the get-go. Is what do we mean when we talk about glycolytic sport? Because it's the exact same for, I would say, the majority of sports where you're doing high intensity activity. Like, sure, most sports you might do a light run here and there, but most sports you're going to be using quite a lot of glycolytic energy, quote unquote. Can you give us a bit of an explanation what we mean when we say that, Loz?
Yeah, for sure. So pretty much our body creates energy in the form of ATP, and that's what fuels all of our exercise. So ATP is short for adenosine triphosphate. And there's these things called energy systems in the body. And what they are, they're physiological pathways that describe how our body converts energy from food into a form of energy that we can use at the cellular level to power like various functions such as exercise. So these energy forms, we talk about glycolytic. Glycolytic comes from glycogen. So glycogen is actually the storage form of glucose, which glucose are sugars. So pretty much it's describing how our body can transport kind of stored energy into usable energy. So pretty much our body can only kind of store a certain amount of this ATP at a time. So our body needs to constantly be generating ATP to fuel exercise. So there's three systems. The first system is the ATP, like creatine phosphate system. And what that does is it uses phosphocreatine to generate that ATP really quickly. And its ability to produce the energy is actually dependent on levels of phosphocreatine inside the muscle. So this system works at the beginning of any exercise. So say, for example, you're sprinting, that first couple of seconds of movement, super high intensity, that's the system that's ultimately providing the energy. So this system kicks in for around the first, 10 seconds-ish of any exercise bout. However, like the body's ability to sustain that energy production beyond a couple of seconds is limited. So then we kind of transition into anaerobic glycolysis, which anaerobic means without oxygen. So I kind of always think of it as, you're doing a workout and you're so exhausted, like you can't breathe. That's kind of how your muscles feel. So you don't actually have any oxygen to kind of fuel this process. So the anaerobic glycolysis, so that generates energy by breaking down circulating sugars in the blood and also that glycogen, which is the storage form of sugar in the muscle, to create that ATP. And this is one of the predominant systems that's supplying ATP during short, intense exercise. So, that's predominantly CrossFit style workouts. And then the third system is the aerobic system. So unlike anaerobic, there is oxygen present here. And this one uses oxygen to convert macronutrients, so our carbohydrates and our fat, to produce that energy at a lower and less intense exercise level. So the production of ATP through the aerobic system is slower, but it does yield a higher amount of ATP. However, when we're talking about lower intensity, that's like a lower VO2 max, maybe you're going for a jog as opposed to doing Fran, which is like bazillion, pull-ups and thrusters for time. So predominantly, CrossFit is that short, intense workout. We're going to be breaking down carbohydrates to provide energy really quickly to fuel our muscles. That's why, any sports dietitian, we're always going to promote carbohydrates, because at the end of the day, it comes back to, okay, what is the most efficient way for our body to break down fuel during exercise?
I think that's such a good point, hey, Loz, because I think people get this a little bit misconstrued. Is like when we talk about, okay, this is why we're giving you carbohydrates during this workout. Mm-hmm. And people often think, oh, okay, you're giving me sugar or whatever. And then they instantly like flick over to this mindset of, oh, sugar is bad. It's like, well, it all depends on like what context we're talking about. And when you understand these energy systems, like you just said, that anaerobic system is using sugars and it's breaking down our glycogen to get these sugars, because it's the main fuel source to get this ATP, which is literally the energy that we're using to fuel this workout. When you understand that, it goes, okay, this makes perfect sense why we need to give you these carbohydrates during this workout.
Yeah, definitely. No, good point. And I think context is key with everything. And, obviously we're lucky in the terms of we had to learn this stuff to get to where we are now. So we have that base knowledge. But for the average Joe, just starting CrossFit, they read this statement, they probably would have no idea that not having carbohydrates is going to impact their training, because they don't understand the processes that go behind it. So I think, once you understand that, okay, our body literally uses carbohydrates in their simplest form, which is sugar, to fuel exercise, you're like, okay, I can see the point, and like I can see why sugar is actually useful and it's not bad.
Yeah, I think a good explanation that I always like to use with clients is like we're talking about the ATP phosphocreatine system, really, really short and sharp. It's like out of the gate when you're sprinting, your first 3 to 5 seconds, but then it's gone, then it's used up, and then it's there, and then you're switching over. Like, I think it's important as well to understand that all of these energy systems are working in sync. You're never just using one over the others, but there are going to be different energy systems which are predominant, right? So you're always going to be in that aerobic. You're slowly going to be burning fat for energy. And I like to think of it as if you're making a campfire, you've got to have those big logs down the bottom, right? That are just keeping the base of the fire going. Yeah. So you've got that going. And what do you need? Like a fire is a great example. Like you need oxygen to keep that fire. That's when you're like lighting it up, you're blowing on it to get the fire going. Yeah. So it's the same as this. You've got that slow burn energy with the aerobic system, which is essentially your fats slowly burning down, giving your body. But carbohydrates are like the kindling. And what happens when you throw kindling on a fire? You just go and it goes up like a bonfire, right? So if you think of all these movements that you're doing in CrossFit or any other high intensity sport, and you think, okay, well, are the movements kind of like a long, slow burn, like the big logs on the fire, or are they like throwing kindling on? And most of the movements are like throwing kindling on. So it makes sense that if we're doing that, we need to be fueling that with the right fuel source, which for that is carbohydrates.
For sure. No, that's an awesome analogy. I think I'm going to have to steal that one, Joey.
So let's go in and let's break down this, because like you said, it's a very like paleo type keto type recommendation. Yeah. And you know what, like each have their place. Absolutely. And you probably, you can make these things work, but let's break it down and let's see in the context of someone going to a CrossFit class at any level, let's see how these guys fit. Let's just break it down. Paleo and keto. Can you give me a rundown of what they are, Loz?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, obviously, like you said, they do have a place and they are a type of diet, but they do kind of fall into that fad diet category, along with gluten-free, bloody raw till 4, all those things. They're all just types of diets that get a lot of hype in the media. Sometimes if you don't actually understand what the diet is, though, they just kind of get misconstrued for this magical way of eating that's going to help you lose weight or do whatever magical thing. But pretty much paleo, as I quickly touched on at the beginning, is a really whole foods focused type of diet. So it focuses on, your meats, your vegetables, your fruits, your seeds, your nuts, pretty much anything that back in the day you could have hunted and gathered yourself, you can eat. But if it comes in a packet or if it's got sugar in it, it's a no-go. So it's a very healthy whole food approach, which is great. All of those things are essential for health. But I think the fact that it is so like, you can't have anything processed, like to what point does that category really fit? Because in a way, everything's processed. Milk is processed because it has to be heated to get rid of bacteria. So it's like, okay, well then all of a sudden is milk bad for me? Obviously that's a controversial one too, because you can get any naturopath on here and say milk is bad for you. But at the end of the day, a lot of foods are processed, and processing isn't always bad, because a lot of the time foods are processed to make them safer to eat or, more convenient. But paleo doesn't like that thought. So yeah, that's paleo diet. And then keto diet, controversial. I will come off the bat and say could just be my own lack of knowledge, but I'm not a massive fan of the keto diet just because of the way I think people use it as like a weight loss miracle. But pretty much a ketogenic diet is a very low carb and high fat diet. And for it to be like a true keto diet, you kind of have around 20 to 50 grams of carbs a day, which is not a lot. And yeah, it's promoted to be a weight loss diet. However, there are actually some promising results with kind of specific conditions. So whether that's epilepsy or diabetes in terms of managing your blood sugars, Alzheimer's disease. But yeah, ultimately the goal of keto diet is reducing your carbohydrate intake so much that your body turns to fat and uses that as fuel. So you kind of get into this state of ketosis. And under ketosis, as I mentioned, your body starts burning your fat stores instead of carbs as energy. And keeping in mind that carbohydrates are our body's actual predominant source of energy. So we're kind of switching from carbohydrates to fat. And yeah, so reducing your carb intake to that 20 to 50 grams, which isn't much. So I think a reason why sometimes keto diets aren't actually successful is because 20 to 50 grams of carbs is not a lot. So if you're doing this high fat diet, but you're actually still having quite a bit of carbs, you're not actually going into a true state of ketosis. And there are ways that you can kind of identify if you're actually in a state of ketosis. You can pee on one of those dipsticks and it tells you, what level you're at, or you start to get you have like satiety, so you're not as hungry. Sometimes your breath can smell funny because ketones produce this weird smell. So yeah, a keto diet is ultimately a very low carb, high fat diet, which yes, seems like it's got promising, outcomes for specific conditions. And also, Geordie, I know you've mentioned, like some really interesting research coming out for kind of a higher fat based diet for athletes, which I think is really interesting. But I think in the terms of CrossFit, especially if you kind of just, a general CrossFitter, like carbs are key, carbs are your fuel for those short acting kind of exercise movements. Like you said, chucking the Kindle on the fire, having a keto diet is just like having a diet full of logs. So it's pretty heavy fuel. Yes, it's always going to be burning, but it's not going to be able to digest as quickly to then provide that energy for your thrusters or for your pull-ups or whatever.
Yeah, they're interesting, right? Because even when you're writing down like the dot points as you're going through it, there are good things and then there's slightly less favorable things, but whether they're good or whether they're less favorable really is just the context, right? Like if we had someone come in and they were like, hey, I just want to lose some weight, I want to do this, but hey, you know what? I love avocado, I love butter, I love things that are like fatty because I love the texture of them or whatever. You could very well put them on a keto diet. Like what's the harm in doing that? They hit the right calories, they'll lose weight. Like you hit the right energy, make sure they're getting all the vitamins and minerals, it'll work for them. But like on the same side of the coin, you could put them on a paleo or any other type of diet, hit the right calories, make sure they're getting all the vitamins and minerals, they'll lose weight or they'll do whatever they want. So I think it's important when you're talking about like this in a sporting context, like, well, what's your goals? Like if you're going to a CrossFit class, and I think a lot of people do this, right? They're not going there to go to the CrossFit games, or they're not going there to be the best in every single class. They're just going there to be a bit healthier. And then by all means, like you can go on this type of diet. I think when we start talking about, okay, well, what's best for your performance, that's when you kind of, my back arches up a bit when people go, oh, you know what, eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds and fruit, little starch and no sugar. And I think, no, it's just not correct. And it's not correct because I'm trying to start a fight with you or an argument with you. It's just that I'm a science guy and I'm a physiology guy, and the physiology says this. And it's not only that I just like the theory of it, it's that I've seen this happen with so many athletes, is when they come in with this mindset and they go, you know what, all these other people are doing this who probably aren't looking for peak performance. They're just doing whatever to be healthy, and healthy can be done a million different ways. But then they're like, okay, I want to get the peak performance. And it's like, okay, if you want to shift into that gear, this is how your body works when you're doing these crazy workouts. And if you do want to get to that top level, which again, not everyone wants to do that, but if you're competitive and you want to get up there, you have to follow these principles. It's as simple as that.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never really seen, an athlete sitting on the side in between their events, like munching on a block of butter. Like you just don't see it. Like at the end of the day, like you said, context is key. And at the end of the day, the best diet for you, I think as a non-exerciser or as an exerciser, is the diet that works best for you and that fits your needs and fits any allergies or intolerances that you have. But when it comes to performance, I think I just don't think for the general, like the average Joe, I think, if you want to perform, you do need carbs. I feel like a broken record because I do always talk about carbs, but it's true. Like you got to fuel for the activity at hand.
Let's go through this though, Loz, because I think, say if someone is going into a CrossFit gym, their first point of contact when it comes to nutrition is not going to be you. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be any other nutrition professional. It's probably going to be the CrossFit website where they see this recommendation. So let's go through each part of it and break it down and just go through like what's good, what's bad about it. Let's go through each little statement that they make.
Yeah, for sure. And, like you said, I think it's true that there's always good and bad things about, any type of a statement, especially like this. Even with the keto, there's great things about it and there's not so great things about it. But if you're a newbie walking in, you see this, you take it for gospel. You're like, oh shit, I can't eat sugar, but I've got to eat heaps of meat and vegetables. Well, what if you're a vegetarian? You already don't fit into that box. Like eat meat and vegetables. Okay, well, great. That sounds like, something my mum would have eaten back in the day, like steak and veg for dinner every night, all night. You know what I mean? So like, yes, obviously meat, great source of protein. We love protein. We need protein to kind of promote that muscle protein synthesis and our recovery. But again, if you're vegan, you're vegetarian, don't eat meat, whatever, I feel like, okay, well then where's your protein going to come from if you read the rest of that statement? Vegetables, great. Get your 5 serves of veggies in every day. I think if we break that first bit down, eat meat, great if you eat meat. Bit ambiguous if you don't eat meat. They don't even say eat fish. What about eat tofu? Something like that. Like, come on, like shout out to our plant-based athletes in that statement. I think they could already adjust that first bit. Nuts and seeds, great. Again, we're following that paleo kind of a vibe here. Great source of fiber, your unsaturated fats. Everyone should be having more nuts and seeds in their diet. But again, you're probably not going to, smash a handful of nuts before you work out, because they're not high in carbs, they're high in fat. They're going to sit in your stomach while you're working out. Great. Also not great if you have peanut allergy. Again, what if you're vegan and you have a nut allergy? You're already like, shit, I can't do CrossFit because I don't fit into this like kind of statement that they're making. Some fruit, I think, again, quite ambiguous. What does some mean to you? For me, when I hear, okay, eat some of this, I'm like, oh crap, that's bad. And like, I have to limit it. It's like, well, if I can only have some of it, it must be bad. I think that's, probably not a very good mentality to have, is because fruit and veggies, they're natural, they are great. I'm sure most countries in the world probably have that 2 serves of fruit a day kind of recommendation. So I think stating coming off the bat, have some fruit. It's like, okay, well, how much is some? And also, why can I only have some and not lots of fruit? Because, fruit, again, a great source of pre-workout. Have a banana before I work out. Or fruit's great. You get all your essential kind of micronutrients in there. Great source of fiber, fluid as well. Fruit's obviously got a really high water content. So I think fruit's good all around. But it gets better. So then, little starch, again, ambiguous. What does little mean? When I think of little starch, okay, it must be bad. So that's why I can only have a small amount. And that's why this statement is really kind of keto paleo vibes, like really promoting that whole food, little carbohydrate kind of mentality. But for anyone that doesn't know what a starch is, it's a type of carbohydrate. So, when we think of like starchy foods, we think of our oats, our breads, our pastas, your root veggies, so your potatoes, pumpkin, I think even parsnips, are they starchy vegetables? Who eats parsnips? So I don't know. And your legumes, again, plant-based athletes, good source of protein is your legumes, your chickpeas and everything like that. So the fact that here, straight away in that statement, they're saying pretty much have little carbohydrates. It's like, well, for the vast majority of the population, apart from the fact that these things taste great, that's where we're getting a large proportion of our daily intake. You have oats for breakfast, you have a sandwich at lunch, maybe you have some potatoes. Again, okay, well, it's kind of contradicting itself, because at the beginning they say, hey, eat meats and vegetables, but then have little starch. Okay, so I can have vegetables, but I can only have a couple of potatoes. Of course, everything in moderation, I think. But at the end of the day, carbohydrates, as we've mentioned throughout this pod, is that carbohydrates are our body's preferred source of energy. And not only the carbohydrate thing, like starchy foods provide a really great source of fiber, great source of micronutrients, folate, iron, B12, all of our whole grains are often really, really rich in all these essential nutrients. So the fact that, okay, you can only have a few of these, it's like, well, we're not only not going to be getting a lot of carbohydrates, you're not going to be getting a lot of fiber. Fiber's great for general health. We should all be getting like 25 to 30 grams a day, depending from male, female. But if you kind of take that massive food group out of your diet, you're also cutting out a lot of fiber. And then moving on to the last statement, no sugar. Okay, sugar, as we mentioned before, there's context. Sugar can be good, sugar can be bad. Kind of depends what mindset you're in. But if we're talking about performance, sugar is probably going to be one of your best mates. Sugar gets broken down in the body. If it's not used for energy immediately, it gets stored as glycogen in our muscles and our liver. And that's what our body is tapping into during exercise, to kind of break it free and create all this energy for our body. So the fact that, they're telling you no sugar, okay, damn, can't have a jam sandwich. That means, again, then we're kind of cutting out the fruit. Okay, firstly, you can have little fruit, but now you can't have sugar. So actually, sorry, you can't have fruit, because all fruit has sugar in it. So it's like, okay, guys, what are you trying to tell us here? I'm confused. So like, you can read that statement and take it with a grain of salt. But if you actually break it down, see how it's like, okay, at the end of this, I feel like the starch and the sugar cancels out the vegetables and the fruit. So pretty much you can eat meat and vegetables.
Yeah, I think I'm just looking at this statement now, and it says something when really it says nothing, right? Like eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch and no sugar. And then the last bit is the best. Keep intake to levels that will support exercise, but not body fat, which is just, yeah, I think that this is someone who probably doesn't have that detailed knowledge of nutrition, or what I think it's happening. And I think this is like a telltale sign of someone who really doesn't understand nutrition or hasn't applied it with many, many different people, right? Like it probably worked for whoever wrote this. And this is obviously just their own personal opinion about this, and then they just put it out. You see that all the time. And I think that's a telltale sign of someone who has no idea about what they're talking about in nutrition. Because I would never, ever project what I do for my athletic performance onto my athletes. And it's drastically different to what I do with my athletes. And I think it works great for me, but I would never, ever do that to any of my athletes because you're trying to figure out what works for them. I think let's go over this, Loz, because I think going over all this theory is great and talking about it is fine, but you're knee deep in it. You're in the trenches every other day. You're always training. You're around these. These are your people. So what are the biggest mistakes that you see when you're actually in a gym and you're talking to guys you're training with, guys and girls, and what are they doing that you're just thinking, you know, these are pretty bad? Like in terms of you becoming the best CrossFit athlete, in terms of getting the best performance, what are the biggest mistakes you're seeing guys make?
I think probably the biggest red flag is, you know, it's none of this stuff. It's none of the fad diet, keto, whatever. I think it's, to be honest, I think with CrossFit, the biggest thing is not eating enough. I think, especially if you're new to the sport, you probably don't realize how intense CrossFit is. I mean, even a 60-minute class is hectic. You know, you're hitting a really heavy strength piece, and then you're doing a Metcon or some sort of WOD. And I think the biggest mistake I see people make is definitely just actually not eating enough. So yes, that also comes with probably not eating enough carbohydrates. But the most common thing I hear from people is like, shit, I'm always hungry, or like I'm exhausted, or, you know, I'm still eating my normal diet, but now I'm doing CrossFit. And I think even if you're just doing that one class a day, even if you're just doing a 60-minute class, your energy, like you just expend so much energy in CrossFit. I think the biggest mistake people make is actually just not being aware of how much their body needs. Because, you know, we'll probably touch on it in a later podcast, but, you know, it's not that easy to fall into low energy availability, but it is a thing. And I think, you know, you've got to give your body enough energy, obviously, to fuel your day and also fuel your exercise. And if you're not even kind of giving your body enough energy to fuel your normal day, because, you know, I think social media still has that massive influence of you're probably eating too much, not enough. Sorry, you're eating too much, but then it makes you think as an athlete, okay, well, am I actually eating enough? So I think the biggest mistake I'd see is probably people not eating enough. And, you know, we all have busy lives. You know, sometimes you have to rush straight from work to the gym and not always having a pre-workout snack. It's like, oh, well, I ate lunch. I'm like, dude, lunch was 4 hours ago. What are you talking about? Like, you need to have something in the car on the way here. So I think, yeah, probably the biggest red flags would be not eating enough. But that probably just comes as well from a lack of knowledge in terms of how our body works and how our body breaks that fuel down. So I think, you know, knowledge is wealth, and that's what hopefully we can do with this podcast. And, you know, with our socials, is trying to educate people on the importance of fueling for your training, because, you know, eating more doesn't always mean you're going to get that. I always look at it as eating more. You put more fuel in your energy tank. If you've got more energy, you can train harder. And then if you're training harder, your performance is going to get better. And to be honest, as a byproduct of that, your body composition is probably going to change in the way that you want it to as well. So I think changing how we view food is a big thing. So yeah, for me, food is fuel. It's not something that I put in my body that's going to make me lose weight, gain weight. But yeah, with CrossFit, if you're starting, your body's going to change anyway, probably in a good way as well. So don't be scared of carbs. Don't be scared of food.
Yeah, even like reading this statement, right? Like keep intake to levels that will support exercise but not body fat. Does two pretty terrible things, I think. Is one, it's confusing AF, because it's like, well, how do I do that? How do I support exercise but not body fat? Like, what does that even mean? And most, I'd say 99% of people coming into a gym do not know how to do that. And it creates all of a sudden this restrictive mindset. And then add on top of that, but not body fat. So now all of a sudden you're encouraging these people to not have body fat on or not be in bigger bodies or whatever. And performance, I think, it's a crazy thing, right? Like you would have people at your gym that have high body fat percentages that are absolute beasts. Like we don't, absolutely, there is a power to weight ratio. And if you're trying to get to the top levels, there's going to be a favorable body composition, but not always. Like I have plenty of athletes that sit way higher in those body composition, and they're far better athletes than I'll ever be. They're far better athletes than most of what my roster will ever be. And if you try and put them down in lower body fat percentages, that goes away. So I think even that is just a ridiculous statement to make. And I think it's setting people up on the wrong path straight from the get-go.
For sure. Yeah, and good point. I mean, triathlon, I think, is a perfect example of what you just said. You know, the amount of like old guys with like beer guts you see absolutely smashing a full Ironman. Like, it's so true. Fitness doesn't really have a look. And I think, yeah, discriminating against supporting exercise but not body fat. It's like, oh shit, I can't have body fat if I want to do CrossFit. Walking into a CrossFit gym is already intimidating. Like without the whole mindset of, oh shit, I need to eat meat, vegetables, but I can't have fat. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. And I think this is the whole, I have this conversation so much with athletes, right? It's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to look like an athlete or do you want to feel like an athlete? Because I've done both. Like when I was cutting weight, getting ready for like jiu-jitsu comps and always cutting weight, like you're always depleted. You're always depleted. And it's not a great state to be in. Like you're constantly got low energy, constantly got low libido. Like training is hard. Like training is hard as it is, but when you're in low energy, it's way harder. And it's just so tough. Your recovery suffers, your sleep suffers, your digestion suffers, everything suffers. And your life kind of sucks. And then you create this like weird mentality of like, oh, this is just what like being an athlete is like. This is just part of the parcel.
Yeah.
And it's not a fun way to live your life. Like yeah, you might get through and you might be able to get through like your comps. Like I remember getting through these comps and then like when you win and you get gold and you're like, okay, like this is obviously working. And it's like, well, no, it's not. And then when you come out like the other side of it and you start actually fueling yourself like an athlete and you're getting up in the morning, you can bounce out of bed and you can go crank out 12 hours of work and 2 hour workouts every single day. And you can still feel really good. You're like, oh man, like this is a completely different feeling, right? Like, and all that really boils down to, there's a lot to it, like your sleep and your recovery and everything, but your food and your nutrition plays such a big part of that where people don't understand. They just think, okay, well, maybe I've got to get super shredded and then maybe I've got to eat way less. And that's what's going to make me an athlete. It's like, no, that is the complete opposite is what's going to make you an athlete.
Yeah, I think that like that type of mindset in terms of like, yeah, if you do CrossFit, I think, yeah, eat to perform. If you want to kind of eat to get shredded and stuff, do that bikini modeling shit. You know what I mean? Like put yourself in low energy availability on purpose for months on end and develop an eating disorder. And you know, that this statement maybe would be great for bodybuilding. You know, little starch, little sugar. So maybe we could suggest they, you know, get this in this reco into another sport. But yeah, I think if you're doing anything in terms of performance, whether it's CrossFit or it's triathlon or it's combat sports, I think this recommendation probably a bit vague. But yeah, having a well-balanced diet that's focusing on performance, which means carbohydrates, is the way to go.
All right, let's finish this off, Loz.
Do it.
Your top tips for someone who is a CrossFit athlete or they've just walked into a CrossFit gym, or maybe they've been training for ages and they just want to start feeling like the best athlete that they can be. What are your top tips for them?
Oh, I'd probably tell them to follow the Flight Dietitian crew, hey, just for some like little hot tips on the side. But I think one thing would probably be kind of focus on you, like don't worry about what everyone else is doing or like what these diet records are. I think eat for yourself, but also be aware and make sure you are eating consistently, you're eating more pre-workout, make sure you're always having some sort of a carb before you're training. Back that up with some carbs again on the back end as well. You want to refuel that tank. So I think my biggest recommendation would probably be don't be scared to eat. Don't be scared for your body to change, because it will as a result of the epic workouts that you're going to be doing. But I think, yeah, if you're unsure, reach out for professional help. Don't reach out for social media influencer help with no credentials. That'll probably lead you down a weird path of fad diets and being scared of food. But I think, yeah, eat pre-workout, carbs are your friend, eat often, eat regularly, listen to your body cues, and also find some reliable information. There's heaps of sports dietitians out there. You know, follow someone that knows what they're talking about. Don't ever be afraid to reach out as well. You know, I don't know about, I'm sure you, Geordie, myself, like I'd always be happy to answer anyone's question. Like I'd rather people come to us for advice than follow some random bit of information out there, because there is so much information out there. And I think if performance is your goal, a lot of that information can be really conflicting and you don't know what to understand. So I think eat your carbs, eat often, eat frequently, listen to your body, and also don't be afraid to reach out for some professional advice, because yeah, there's a lot of shit out there. And I think, you know, having that guidance is it's gonna help you understand what your body needs.
Yeah, that's really good. There's one more question I do want to ask you, Loz, before we do wrap this up. You've been training for quite a long time now. What is the biggest thing that you've learned from getting in there and actually doing it and doing all these different types of workouts, seeing all the other people in the gym?
Yeah.
What's the biggest shift in your mindset from when you started to now when it comes to nutrition and CrossFit?
I think the biggest thing for me is, like, I sound silly saying it, but I honestly view food as fuel. Like I've, you know, in the past, I've had a pretty bad relationship with food. And I did always have that shit. If I eat this, it's probably going to make me gain weight, or, oh my God, if I have this, will it make me fat? Or is this good? Or is this bad? This person's not doing that. So I think CrossFit's really taught me just to focus on myself and to fuel my body for my needs. Like I know what intensity I'm going to be training at, or I know if I'm just going to take it easy, or like I'm so in tune with my body now to what I need. And that's because I focus on like food as fuel. as I said, with that kind of cycle before, I was like, okay, what I put into my body is the amount of energy I have then to fuel that session. So if I don't put enough food in the tank, I'm probably going to have a shit session. Like sometimes it gets to the point where if say I've got to go to the gym from placement or from work or something, and I actually don't have food, I'm like, shit, am I even going to train today? Because like, if I don't eat enough, I know I'm going to have a shit session. So I just know for me, like food is my fuel. And it's really helped me develop such a healthy relationship with food and my body. I know what my body needs. So yeah, I'd say CrossFit's been awesome for me in terms of developing a really healthy relationship with my food and with how I view my body too.
You kept that together really well. I'm going to keep that in the YouTube because my webcam just fell over and Loz kept it together really well. But that was a good explanation. Let's wrap it up there, Loz. If people are listening to this and they go, holy crap, I need help with this, I want to get the best and the most out of myself, out of my training sessions, out of my recovery, how do they hit you up?
Yeah, follow me on Instagram. I'm at the XFit Dietitian. My email address is in the link as well. If your words are too many for the DM box, flick me an email. But yeah, you can find me on Insta.
Excellent. Let's wrap that up there, Loz. But yeah, we'll get you back on and we'll go over this in a bit more detail. But Loz, thanks so much for coming on. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Geordie.